How's it going? Yay, we're all here. I am excited to talk with you, and before I kind of dive in, I want to say we're going to have some time for question and answer at the end. And it's always an awkward time in Seattle, because that's the time where I just stare at you expectantly. And you stare back, like, what? And then eventually, a white guy goes. I would love that to not be how this works this time. So, if you have questions, sorry, white guys, but you know it's true. I would love for you to have them, if anything, just to make my day. Start thinking about them, hold them, so that way when we get to Q&A, we can answer them. Also, because I'm not coming back anytime soon. It's not because I don't love you guys. It's just I'm not in the School of Public Health. So take this opportunity now. People often email me a week after I was there, and they're like, I had a question, and I'm like, no, you didn't, because you didn't raise your hand. So I would love if we could have robust conversation, whether it's about the work, whether it's about applying it to where you are. It doesn't matter, just kind of have it together so that when I ask, we're not doing this whole thing, all right? So my name is Ijeoma Oluo, and I am a writer and speaker on social issues in America, primarily race and gender. And when I'm talking locally, I like to be really clear about the fact that this book is really a product of the Seattle area. And I don't know if I would have written it or even gotten into the writing I'm into if I hadn't grown up in the Seattle area. And it's not because Seattle provides a great racial education. In fact, it's quite the opposite. Seattle is a place of extreme whiteness that also likes to imagine itself a racial justice warrior. But it's very hard to do that when you've never been to battle. And I like to say that living in Seattle as a Black woman oftentimes is like going to see a movie about slavery with your white friends. You're sitting next to them, and they're aghast and appalled, and they're telling you all the things they would have done to end slavery. They would have taken up arms, they would have been resistors, they would have, helped in the Underground Railroad. But you also know that they barely made it to the film because of traffic. And it's important to recognize that it's very easy to imagine yourself as an anti-racist when day in and day out you get to be surrounded by whiteness and very rarely have to make accommodation for people of color, and it's very easy to ignore the realities of the people of color in your midst. But anti-racism is an action, it's not a sentiment. You cannot will yourself into it, you have to act your way into it. And it is something that is always up for debate and always can be revoked. And you're only really an anti-racist in the eyes of people of color, not in your own. And so I wrote this book, I came to my writing because I lived in a city that really thought they had it all together and didn't. And I was raised in a city where I was consistently treated differently because of the color of my skin, but no one would actually say the words. Now, it's not to say that people haven't said the words. I have been called the N-word. I think you're actually more likely to be called it at least once in your life in Seattle, where people can run away and feel safe than you would in a majority Black area where people wouldn't dare. But day in and day out, what's being said is often silent. And it's the way in which people treat you, the access you have to services, the way you're treated in job interviews, or even just how the environment is structured around you. And I have always been a systems thinker. I've always been someone who looked at everything and said why, and needed things to make sense. And this was something that never made sense to me. It never made sense to me why no one was ever naming this thing. Why people were acting like they weren't treating me differently when they were. It was even more troubling the fact that they were treating me differently. It was just that they were pretending like they weren't, that we were acting like none of this existed. And it bothered me to my core because it was impacting so many people's lives. And growing up in that, it can be crazy making. It can really make you feel like you've stumbled into an alternate reality, because all the people around you who are otherwise rational and who give every indication that they care about issues like race and justice are being deliberately obtuse around issues of race in their own neighborhoods. And so in order to survive and know that I wasn't crazy, I started writing and talking and finding patterns and talking about what I was seeing. And that's really how I came to where I was. It was the effort of trying to translate to people in my neighborhood, in the greater Seattle area, what my lived experience was, in the hopes that somehow I could make a connection to the values that they said they held. And it was through that that I really found my path into where I am today. And so for better or worse, this is a Seattle book. And oftentimes people will pick up my work, they'll pick up my book and say, oh, you know, I've got a white cousin in Tennessee who needs to read this. But you need to read this. And you need to read this because you need to find out what you have been doing wrong. I wrote this having this place been the only place I've known for most of my life. And I think I needed to read this. I needed to write this. I needed to know I wasn't alone. I needed to see that what happened to me was worth being put down on paper. I needed to know that it isn't just the most extreme brutality of racism that needs to be acknowledged, but the everyday ways in which we are cut down and minimized and harmed, and the everyday opportunities to do better that are passed by, that need to be recognized, because it builds a whole life. And what is crushing people of color in this country is not one cop at a time, although sometimes I think they're trying their best. It is the systems of inequity in this country and the ways in which we uphold them that are crushing people of color. And we have to be able to investigate our interaction with our systems and the ways in which our biases are able to allow us to continue to do harm to populations of color. So I've seen a lot with people talking about race. When you write a book called So You Want to Talk About Race, you end up talking about race more than you ever wanted to in your life. And I have seen friendships absolutely destroyed. I've seen family relationships destroyed. I've seen people lose jobs. I've seen people lose their reputations. I've seen people at risk of physical violence. I've seen people harassed. I've seen people called names and slurs and made to feel both physically and mentally unsafe for daring to talk about race. And when I asked people what their issues or their fears in talking about race was before I started writing this book, what I found often was that people of color were saying, well, you know, I got fired from my last job for talking about race, and so I would like for that to not happen. I, had to leave my apartment. I'm currently helping to crowdfund for a family that started talking about race in their neighborhood and have been harassed by their neighbors left and right. People putting Make America Great Again stickers and things in their yard and stuff like that to let them know that they're not safe. People who said, well, I was called violent the last time I tried to talk about racism in my neighborhood. I was told that I was too intimidating. I lost friends that I've had for my whole life trying to bring up some of the things they do that are racist. And when I talk to white people, oftentimes it's a much more personal fear. I was called racist. It got angry and heated and I felt sad. I felt like I couldn't do anything. I felt like I couldn't have a solution. I felt like I was painted as the enemy. But it's much less, very rarely do I hear white people say, well, I tried to talk about racial equity and I got fired, or I was threatened, or I was called violent, or I was made to feel unsafe. But I've also seen in these conversations, I've seen interracial couples bring their whole selves to relationships in a way that they've never been able to before. I have seen economic think tanks discover glaring holes in their methodology and data that help them better serve their communities. I have seen primary schools increase their positive engagement with families of color. I've seen diverse communities band together to march and vote for justice. And this one topic can have amazing, transformative solutions, or it can bring absolute disaster, pain, and heartache. And I think that oftentimes It's recognizing both, recognizing that we have to talk about this and that there is so much at risk if we do or don't, that keeps people in limbo. There are a couple of reasons why discussions on race end up horribly. One, we can't even agree on what racism is. And oftentimes that kind of dooms a discussion from the get-go. And I talk about it in my book, but mostly here's the thing. It's racist if a person, or it has to do with race if a person of color says it has to do with race. And I think it's important that we understand this fundamental truth, that you cannot found a country on the genocide of one population of color and build it with the forced labor of another population of color and act like anything on this soil is not about race and about racism. It will be as long as this nation stands. And you don't get to say it's not. It's about race if it disproportionately impacts a population of color. And it's important to recognize that. You can have issues that impact multiple communities, but if you see it disproportionately impacting communities of color, it is about race. And it's about race if it is related to or ties into issues that impact communities of color. We have to set that aside. We have to realize that oftentimes these are distractions to stop us from solving an issue. But anytime a person of color says they think it's about race, it's about race. It's about race because we are people who bring our lived experiences into a room. And this means that if you are white, things aren't racially neutral. You're bringing whiteness into a room. If you're white, how you're interacting with the world is always at least a little bit about whiteness. Just like as a black woman, when I enter a room, it's always at least a little bit about blackness. All that we do is informed by our life experience. And that's valid. And oftentimes we act as if there is a neutral that exists that is exempt from this. But really what we're talking about is whiteness. That whiteness, the white default, is the only valid experience with which to operate. And we have to prove that something is an outlier of that. And then it becomes this little segmented conversation. But everything is about race. Another issue we have is that it is a painful topic. When we're talking about issues of systemic racism, we're talking about the lived trauma of human beings. We aren't having thought exercises, we aren't having debate. We are talking about something that people are living, even often in the context of the conversation itself. We are talking about the cumulative effect of a lifetime of racism and the harm of racism. It's important to recognize that when we sit down to discuss what we might think is one small issue on race, what we're talking about is that issue and how that issue ties into a lifetime of similar experiences on race. And we're talking about it in a space that is oftentimes racially coded and racially disempowering. We've been taught to only discuss violent interpersonal racism. So oftentimes when I give talks, I ask people, when I say racist, what do you think? And people will say Klan members, or maybe a Trump voter, or maybe Charlottesville. But they won't say the public education system, right? Everyday interactions are what are crushing people of color. And it has been that. Everyday interactions with our systems. How we support our systems, what we need from our systems, what we don't get from our systems, is what's crushing people of color. And it has always been that way. Even when we look at the extreme violence of the post-Reconstruction South, what we were talking about are systems, talking about ways of upholding and reintroducing, after a very brief hiatus, an exploitative economic and political system. The end result was not fear and physical and emotional pain in and of itself. It was the continued exploitation and subjugation of people of color for the economic benefit of white elites. It has always been that. It has not been the result of a long-standing grudge against people of color that we have this system. That grudge has been manufactured, it has been stoked up where necessary to bolster and uphold the system, but the benefit has always been economic. Even the emotional benefits that some white people get from racism have been manufactured so that people continue to play their role in an economically exploitative system. It is important to recognize this because your intentions mean nothing outside of how they might motivate you to do something different. You cannot hug your way out of racism. You can be married to people of color, you can have children of color, and still uphold violent white supremacy. But that's not how we've been taught to look at it. We have been taught to look at it as someone who's burning crosses, who's threatening your life. And that's important because they want us to think that the only way to solve racism is if you manage to have a breakthrough moment with each individual virulent racist out there, as if those are our real power players in society. But Black people in America are not at risk. Hispanic people in America, Native people of America, Asian Americans, we are not at risk because white people don't like us. And that risk won't go away because they start liking us. It's because they can like us and love us and still uphold a system that is crushing us. And so we have to start divorcing intention from racism. We have to start looking at systems and know that our accountability stands no matter what we intend. That we are responsible for how we uphold systems of racism no matter who we love. And that the only way we get to justice is by changing our actions. And if we have to change minds to change actions, we will. But the changing of minds is not success in itself and is not an action in itself. Oftentimes, also, we are denied adequate language to describe the ways in which we encounter and uphold racism. And that's part of why I decided to write my book. When I started asking people the problems they were having with race, a lot of what I heard from people of color was, I know something in my heart is racist. Something will happen to me and I know it's racist. And when I try to talk about it, someone wants me to explain it so explicitly that it can't be denied. And when I can't do that, I'm dismissed. But how many of you in primary school were taught anti-racism? I wasn't. How many of you were given the language for the school to prison pipeline in primary school? Or to talk about job discrimination? How many of you were taught about microaggressions? All of these things that are real, that we give names because they are impacting us, and are useful, important terms to know so that we can call a thing and diagnose it and work towards a solution, are routinely denied people in this country. And people end up feeling ashamed and embarrassed that they don't know how to describe what is happening to them. We think that 400 years into this, we should know. But I think we should look at it the opposite. We are 400 years into this because we've been denied that knowledge. Because we act as if it's specialized. There are certain people, there are racial warriors who are supposed to know this language and they're supposed to talk about it. There are college professors that are supposed to know this language. And none of it applies to us in the real world. But all of these terms, these were created by primarily people of color to describe what was happening in their lives so that we could be empowered with the language to work towards solutions. When we fail at our discussions on race, people become defensive and angry, and oftentimes that defense creates a secondary problem that is treated like the primary problem. People experience then the additional harm of gaslighting, where they are told that the problem they're seeing doesn't actually exist, and the real, totally different problem exists that didn't exist until the moment the issue of race was brought up. They are told that what they see doesn't exist because it's not the experience that the person they're trying to communicate it to is having, as if two people can't have different experiences. Constantly, people of color are told they don't live in reality and they're not reliable narrators of their own experience. When this happens, then the hurt is compounded. And the issues that have to be addressed in an environment where trust has been lost. People harden into more extreme positions, and the original problem is never solved. It is important to recognize the risk of not having these conversations correctly and recognize that our fumbling attempts that are given without any care are doing real, lasting harm to people of color. So if we're looking at how to increase our chances of success, here's some tips I have. And I say these knowing that these are still not always going to work. But if you increase the amount of space you can get before it fails, great. If you can leave a little room in people's hearts and minds to come back to a subject later, great. Or if it can fail in a way that does the least amount of harm to people of color, great. So 1, talk in good faith. Don't indulge the sport of debate on racial issues. It is It is dehumanizing to people of color to have their humanity treated like it's something that is up for debate in this day and age. Don't encourage it. Don't seek to score points. And I'm speaking primarily to white people because most people of color I know never do this. We don't sound like, oh, that was an invigorating discussion about my safety and humanity in this country. Like, we don't think like that. We're trying to save our own lives. But I routinely see, especially on social media, but even in person, especially on college campuses, this competitive one-upsmanship of who can say the right things, who can make the most points, or who can play the devil's advocate enough. And what you're talking about are people's lives. It's not okay. Every ounce of discussion on race needs to be affirming the humanity and dignity of people of color. Another tip here, state your intentions and get agreement on topic. One of the biggest ways in which these conversations fail is that there are often multiple conversations at once, especially when we're talking about white people talking with people of color. So what we have are 2 completely separate conversations that are happening. You have a person of color saying, this is an issue that matters to me, this is what's impacting me, or this is what you have done to me or are doing to me that needs to change. And white people enter the conversation saying, I am not racist. Those are 2 separate conversations. And they don't meet in the middle at any point. And you can talk for weeks without realizing that you've been having 2 separate conversations. And so I say, if you're going to enter into especially structured conversations, but even if you're sitting with a loved one to have a conversation, think first, what do I want to get out of this conversation? What is my goal? And verbalize it. Because what you may find, honestly, is that that's not a conversation the person you're sitting with is willing to have. And it's important to do this as people of color and as white people, because oftentimes I find that white people want to set up conversations on race, and their intention is something that is way outside of the comfort level and safety level of people of color. I've had white people come to many of my talks and say, one lady came up to me and said, none of this is going to help me make black friends. I said, oh, you missed my talk on how to make black friends. But, if she had said, I'm looking for the talk on how to make black friends, she could have saved us all a lot of time. But a lot of these conversations people will have where it's like, I've just always been curious. I just want to have this different experience. Oh, I want to feel more comfortable in a room with people of color. If you state it. State what your intention is. Know what a successful conversation would look like to you, and then verbalize it. So that way everyone can know if this is the conversation they want to have or not. And so that if the conversation leaves that topic, you can always bring it back. Or know when to cut loose. Say, you know what, we've gotten so far off of this. It's not what I agreed to. We're going to end this conversation here. We might pick it up later, we might not. Be aware of the power dynamic in the room. It's important to recognize this power dynamic is not just about who is a superior position or who's not. I have seen supervisors, managers, directors of color surrounded by a room of white subordinates and known that's not a power dynamic where that leader of color is going to ever feel safe and comfortable talking honestly about issues of race. It is important to recognize what you're putting people of color into when you're trying to have these conversations. And it's important to recognize as people of color in these conversations that you have every right to feel unsafe or to withhold or do whatever you need to do to protect yourself in a situation where you don't feel like it is safe. You have every right to state, this is not the room I want to be in if you want this conversation. That I don't feel like being the token person here. I don't feel like risking all of my professional relationships here. And if you want me to engage honestly and openly, you will create an environment where I feel safe doing so. But oftentimes, and in the paperback for my book, I had to write a whole section on how to talk about talking about race, because people were putting book groups together for my book and then having no care for the one or two people of color in the room who were going to be turned to be therapists to process all of the white emotions as people were reading the book. And then asked to give honestly their opinions of what the person sitting across from them might have done that's harmful, while they've been given plenty of example of how not well they process it. And so it's really important to recognize that room and recognize what you need to do to support a safe and healthy environment for discussion, and one that does not overly extract from people of color. Do research where you can. One of the great things about white supremacy is it's not incredibly creative. It's never had to be. The problem you're facing is a problem that has existed before. Even my book is just a new wording mix for a very old problem and for very old theories. It's me saying, maybe this combination will work for this period of time. That's what each of us are doing. Each of us who write and talk on issues of race. We're trying to find a new way to say the thing we've always known in the hopes it will stick. Because people don't use their resources. But if you respect people of color and you respect these conversations, you should also respect the effort that's already been put into talking about these issues. Respect the time of people of color. And know that you can at least get some background information so that you're not asking rudimentary questions on these issues. It's incredibly important as well, if you're talking about specific issues of race, to try to find the long-term and broad and systemic ramifications of the issue you're talking about. If you're talking about an issue of resources in the classroom, make sure that you understand the broader impacts of lack of diversity in classroom resources, in the history of it. You want to research that, not just the definition of when something is lack of diversity. You want to find out the broader impacts. Oftentimes, that's the most important research you can do. Respect the boundaries of people of color. So always remember, like I said earlier, these discussions need to be grounded in the humanity and dignity of people of color. And this means that the definition of success for any of these conversations should lie in the definition of success for people of color. People of color should be able to feel the positive results of this work. And this means that you have to find out what people's boundaries are, what they are safe and comfortable talking about or having discussed, so that people feel whole and accepted and cared for throughout the entire process. The edification of whiteness is not more important than the dignity of people of color. And we can't find a way out of white supremacy with anti-racist strategies that continuously work off of the backs of people of color. Have a plan for fragility. It is really important, and I know that many of y'all here are familiar with Robin DiAngelo and her work. And many of us, especially people of color, are just very familiar with what is now known as white fragility that we've been writing and talking about for many, many generations. The truth is that it is a really natural human response when you are told that you have done something that harms people you care about, or done something that is incongruent with your values, to become defensive. to want to find a way to prove that that's not true, so that you can recenter how you see yourself. Know that that is a normal response. It is a response I get every time I'm made aware of how I've harmed people. But as human beings, it is our responsibility to know how to deal with that. And your best bet for dealing with that is to start when you're not in a heightened situation. So before you start these conversations, think, what am I going to do if I start to get defensive? What am I going to do if someone else gets defensive? What are the boundaries we can set in place? What are the discussions we can have ahead of time? The expectations we can set to make sure that 5 minutes into this conversation, it doesn't become about the hurt feelings of white attendees. And so when I give workshops, a lot of times I tell people, okay, figure out if you need to say a mantra to yourself. Figure out if you need to write down what you are or are not going to do in this meeting. Figure out if you're going to tap your neighbor on the shoulder when she starts talking about how much this hurts her and it's not about her, how you're going to mitigate that situation. Figure out if you need a space for people to walk to so they can catch their breath and come back. But you have to figure out what you're going to do with it, because it will pop up. And I have a system in place too. I'm a public figure, which means oftentimes when I mess up very publicly. And I'm usually notified via Twitter. And it happens so often that I have to have a system. I have to remember that I have rules, that I've worked it out for myself. No, Ijeoma, you're not going to tweet a single thing back. You're going to pause, you're going to catch some breath, wait till your heart rate's a bit normal, and then you're going to start going through, is this part of a system of broader behavior? Am I contributing to something harm? Try to prove the person right. See where you can find improvement. There is no empowerment in proving that person wrong. The empowerment is finding where they're right and you can do something better. And finally, figure out what is actionable. It is important to recognize that we are very rarely talking about thoughts and feelings, even if there are a lot of thoughts and feelings involved. For a person of color to take on the extraordinary risk of talking about a racial issue, it has to be impacting them in a really measurable way. Now, sometimes it is about the emotional toll that ends up taking a really measurable toll on physical, mental health. But oftentimes, it's things like your child's ability to be seen and heard and do well in school, your ability to function at work without being interrupted and having to navigate all of these different racist microaggressions, your ability to serve your communities of color effectively. There is almost always something actionable beyond what you can say to someone and what you can hear. Find the actionable item. Find where it's measurable. Find where you can be truly accountable, where you can show progress. And develop a plan to hold yourself responsible. And this is not just structural plans. This means that if someone in your peer group, one of your friends comes to you, it is not enough to say, I hear you, or I'm going to try to do better. You have to figure out what better looks like and communicate that and know that it can be seen and know that you're willing to come back to the issue and ask, did we make progress? But oftentimes these discussions are treated more like group therapy. And I want a black therapist. And there are no black therapists. If I wanted a white therapist, I would just go to regular therapy in Seattle. And I don't feel like being a therapist to white people who are just now discovering that they're part of a racist system. My healing doesn't lie in that. And so it's really important to recognize what is actionable, measurable progress by finding where the harm becomes tangible and focus there and report back. So these are some steps, and it can seem like a lot, but the cool thing is honestly, sometimes when I feel like I'm flooding people with this information, is what I'm actually doing is flooding people with opportunities. when I say that racism is in everything, it's in every system we interact with, that means that an opportunity to be anti-racist is in every system you interact with. And that's amazing. What's more disempowering? Me telling you that 50 times a day, you get a chance to make a different choice that deconstructs racism. Or that you have to go find a Klan member, sit with them every day, tell them people of color are people, get them to believe that, then register them to vote. And then walk them through their voters pamphlet. And maybe, and do this one person at a time. Obviously, interacting with our systems, looking at where we spend our money, how we vote, who's in our meetings, what books we're reading, what data we're taking for granted, what we're legitimizing and what we aren't, how we are flexing our power day in and day out, is a far more empowering stance to take than we just have to wait until old racists die and then find a way to also deal with the new racists that are springing up all over the internet. And so I hope that you have these discussions and instead of feeling intimidated, you feel excited. There's always a pain in these conversations. We're dealing with things that are really happening to real people. But anytime someone brings something to you, and no matter what your race, because we are all taught by white supremacy to uphold white supremacy in different ways. So I'm often told to uphold anti-blackness in certain ways, especially as a light-skinned black woman. I'm taught to uphold anti-Asian sentiment in many ways due to white supremacy. I'm told to uphold the erasure of Native people due to white supremacy. All of the times that that's brought to me, I have to pause and say thank you, because that person is giving me the opportunity to no longer do that. And you have to jump at that opportunity. Because every day that you don't, you're contributing to harm. And so even though it is painful to see that, pause and recognize the extreme generosity that's been given to you. Recognize that even after people of color have been shown time and time and time again that it's honestly not in their best interest to speak up, that they decided to anyway. What a gift. If you're white and you're scared of these conversations, imagine what it's like for us. You're scared and you're the majority. Not only are we disempowered, we're having these conversations 10, 20 times more than you. And they're failing at the same rate. And yet we still have them because we have to. And because part of us has to believe that progress can be made. So you're welcome. That's a gift at extreme personal risk, extreme effort. And you honor it by engaging with it and figuring out what you can do. And so I hope that as we talk and answer questions and as you start to look at the rest of the work that you're doing here on campus, that you look at all of your interactions, look at where you're sitting in your classrooms, look at the work you're doing, look at your peer group, your friend group, and say, what could I be doing here from an anti-racist perspective? Where can I insert a little of that discomfort that allows for honest dialogue? Where can I make change? Where can I look for what I am doing that's causing harm so that I can find what I can do that will end that harm? All right, so now I'm going to open up for questions. All right, so there's the mic if you have questions. We already talked about this, y'all. Thank you. I see you. I appreciate you.
First of all, thank you very much. And my question is,
Oh, yeah.
Well, I mean, the public education system in general.
Yeah, I mean, there's so many layers to it, so I'll try to be as brief as possible, but I never am when I talk about this. I'm a Black woman who went to school. I'm a parent. And I've spent more time in schools than anywhere else in doing this work. It's important to recognize that our educational system has always been racist in nature. The way in which this country has sought to educate children of color has always been racist in nature. First and foremost, to erase traditional cultures and art forms and appreciation for traditional culture from populations of color. B, to mold children of color in an image of white supremacy and to control them for the benefit of white students. It is important to recognize that every aspect of our education system is filled with white supremacy. And that's elementary school all the way up through college. College especially, higher education, was really a finishing school for rich white men. And it's really important to recognize that the entire structure of our most hallowed institutions has been built to secure and maintain power for rich white elites. And this means that the curriculum that would help and benefit students of color or benefit white students into being anti-racist is a direct threat to traditional education. It's important to recognize that even our definitions of success are white supremacist in nature. That when we say that our students of color are increasing in their GPAs or matriculation rates in school, what we're saying is that they are getting better at withstanding their degrees in white supremacy. At the end of the day, it's still a system that was never meant to serve them and will never serve them. And yet, oftentimes, it's the closest we can get to surviving in this world. What a horrible bargain to make. And so if you want to look at addressing white supremacy in the education system, you have to look at rooting it out from the very beginning, looking at every aspect, looking not only at the violent white supremacy of school resource officers, of the erasure of people of color from our textbooks, of the lack of support for faculty of color, and the abuse of faculty of color on campuses throughout this country. But we also have to look at our definition of academic success, our definition of ideal students, our definition of diversity success, and question all of it as white supremacist in nature. Thanks.
Could I respond to a person in my community who says, I care about racism, I want to just have difficult conversations about race, and then the conversation that she wants to have is, I found an interview with the one Black person in America who doesn't believe structural racism exists, and if you don't want to take that opinion very seriously, discuss it with me, you're being intolerant. Is there any hope to engaging with that person, or do you just give up and run away?
Yeah, no, I mean, I would say, honestly, they should be a lower priority. We do a lot of harm by just thinking that this is worth engaging. We legitimize it by engaging it, right? We legitimize it by saying, let's keep talking about Candace Owens and things like this, right? Who? What? She's a scam artist. Why would we do that? There are enough people in this country who do honestly believe that systemic racism is a problem, even if they don't get how, even if they're messed up in how they're coming up with the solutions about it, that we should be engaging them. And so what I do is I take things like that as a sign that that person is not invested at all in the integrity and humanity of people of color. And until they get to that point, they're of no use to me. And so what I want everyone to think of is, what's the best use of my time? Is it a good use of my time to get this person whose inclination is to find outliers that will support their racist beliefs? Or to find someone who continuously shares the right things on Facebook but hasn't done anything with it? And give them options of things to do and say, hey, do you want to vote for this with me? Have you spread the word about this? Have you been spending your money in minority-owned businesses? Have you been looking at these tax proposals? Have you been looking at have you signed on to this meeting with me? Have you signed this petition with me? Like, engage the people who already know, because the numbers say we should be in a better world than we are. And I've been around enough to know that most of the time, when you're looking at the overwhelming evidence that white supremacy is a problem and that violent racism is a problem, the people who want to believe otherwise are going to keep believing otherwise. And very few people believe otherwise for any reason other than they want to, or because their community is actively invested in them not finding another way. Focus on the people who want to get the credit for saying the right things without doing anything and start converting them into action, talking about how we have to. Now, that being said, I do think it's always really important to voice your disapproval of those tactics. It's very important to not let people try these things and not have any sort of cost. And so just saying, you know what, no, I'm not going to engage with you because this is racist in nature and because lives are on the line and I'm not going to waste my time. And you should think about it. Make it unpleasant. Make the attempt unpleasant. But then don't engage further, right? Don't give the reward of debate, the reward of wasting time, because that's what people seek to do. Mm-hmm.
I don't know, okay, here we go. So I really love what you said about find what's actionable, where it's measurable, and how you can be held accountable, and then work to make changes in that. And a little research group that I work for here in one of the university departments, we're just embarking on an equity process within our organization. And we're trying to develop a metric that would do a baseline of where we are now with our equity, and that we could then follow over time. So I'm wondering if you have any ideas about what should be in that metric. What are the things that we ought to be measuring and how we're handling our own work and who we are that we could then measure over time to show any change?
Yeah, I would say I would start first with your faculty of color. But in a way that is respectful of their time and energy. Oftentimes these goals are set within whiteness, and then we go through the whole process, and the people who measure its success are also white, and then people are shocked when people of color who are the most knowledgeable don't call it a success. But it is really important if you're going to start with faculty of color, and I will say this, I have never been to an educational institution where your experts on what needs to happen aren't your faculty of color. Not only are they existing as professionals and peers in this white space, they are also counseling and putting in extra work for students of color. Start with them, but also in a way that doesn't increase the outsized burden they already have. So whether that's looking at what sort of professional accolades or benefits they get from engaging in this work, how much credit they will get for the work. Looking at if there's financial compensation that can be given, but make sure that we recognize that you're not contributing to the already outsized burden that faculty of color have on academic campuses. They are burning out at alarming rates and always have been because of how much they carry. And they are never fairly compensated professionally or economically for how much they bring to campuses, but they are your fountains of knowledge. And whatever you can start with them, they're gonna tell you everything. Start with asking, what issues that they see and what success would look like to them. Because I know so many academics of color, faculty members of color, who have whole dream sequences of what in a space free of white supremacy would look like, and how much work they could do, and how lovely it would be if this one thing and this one thing were removed. Talk to them, but in a way that doesn't increase the burden or is exploitative.
Thank you so much. Hello, deep gratitude for you being here. Thank you. My question's about performative allyship, and particularly for white people and working with other white people. I'm wondering if you could speak about the balance between one, doing one's own personal work to undo racism within your own life as a white person, and sharing that work with other white people and encouraging people to do their work, and how does that not become performative?
For me, I don't care if it becomes a competition. I don't care if your reward is ego, if you want to look good. What I care about is, at the end of the day, can people of color feel the work? If they can't feel it, it is performative in the sense that's harmful. But I don't care, make it cool. Make anti-racism cool again, Make it the fun thing to do. So long as we can feel it. And so that's really what I would look at. Your measure of success is going to be, is this making a measurable impact in the lives of people of color? And especially your in-group work. Are we adjusting and changing and creating a whiteness that is doing less harm and that is maybe doing help in some areas? If not, if the people of color are looking at you like they always have, you're not doing it, right? And strive towards that and really let the use that you are to people of color be the guide. And I don't care if it's sincere or not. If that's the guide, it will work. I care about the end results. Just like I don't care about your intentions in racism, I don't care about your intentions in anti-racism. What my brother likes to say is, that won't raise my credit score, right? Will it raise my credit score, right? Will it increase my access to goods and services? Will it make me feel safe and secure? If it will, good. Otherwise, no. And that's really where it lies. And so I don't care. I would love to see a competition who can be the most effectively anti-racist out there. Give awards, have shows, do whatever you need to do. So long as it's getting done.
With us. I really like the fact that you call it what it is. Racism, you call it what it is. I feel like often we are afraid to call it, especially in our institution. We want to call it justice. We want to call it equality. Instead of really saying that it's an unjust system that we're dealing with, there's inequality, and that's what it is, there's racism, but we like to couch it in words that make us feel good. My first question is, what do you think about that? And then the second thing is that my son, who attended Seattle Public School, read your book, and he said to thank you for validating his feelings.
Tell your son I said thank you, and that was a lovely message, and I appreciate his generosity to pass that to you. And thank you for passing that on to me. I think it's really important to recognize that if we want to be able to fix a thing, we have to name the thing. And the reason why it is so important to call something what it is because the solution differs. If we say, oh, this is just an equality issue, then what we're saying is that any inequality has the same solution and the same cause. And that's simply not true. Racism itself is its own system, its own structure. It has its own causes and its own solutions. And I say in this book, I had a conversation with a white friend who was saying that for the election, we should have just talked about the economy more, because it really was the economy. And if we improved the economy, if we talked about working class issues, then race would get caught up in it. And I asked him, I said, do you think that black people are poor for the same reason that white people are? And he paused, because I think almost anyone can say no. So why would you think that the solution to that poverty would be the same? And that's why we have to call racism racism. Because even though the end result may look the same, it may look the same, ableism may have the same end result on a disabled population as racism has on a racist population. Ask a disabled person of color if their life isn't magnified in difficulty because of the intersections of these two separate systems of oppression. And they're gonna look at you like, what are you talking about? Of course. It is important to recognize that we're calling it what it is, not because people feel like they need to be heard, not because we want to have a name, because we formed a cool club. It's because you can't have a solution if you're not diagnosing a problem. And I think especially in public health, you all recognize the need to call a thing what it is. If you're ever going to get to any sort of diagnostic point, any sort of solution, you're constantly looking for ways to pull it apart and say, no, this is actually a different problem. And yet when it comes to race, we're never willing to look and say, this might just be racism. We're always trying to put it up in some higher blanket issue. And that's white supremacist in nature often, because people don't want to work towards a solution they can't see their own immediate benefit in. And they don't want to work towards a solution where they might not feel that the problem is as familiar to them. We always want to couch these things in empathy, but empathy has its limits. And so we will call it the more empathetic term, right? And say, well, you know, you've been discriminated against. No, you don't. If you've never been a person of color, you have never experienced systemic racism in your life. And I don't care if you went to a country of color. White supremacy has had its claws in every country in this world. You have not experienced systemic racism a day in your life. And you can't substitute one experience for the other. And you can't substitute one solution for another. And so if you care at all about fixing issues of systemic racism, then you have to actually be willing to call things systemic racism.
One of the things that I really loved about your book was the explicit focus on intersectionality and how you actually just keep modeling it throughout the book. All the examples that you use, like the example that you just mentioned in your last response, and I really felt seen as a queer Latino woman in this book in a way that I haven't in other books about race. So thank you for that. And I sort of see intersectional perspectives on racism as being like talking about race 2.0, like the advanced version, and I wondered how you got good at it, and how we might be able to get to that next level here.
Thank you. I think part of it is living in multiple identities as a queer Black woman, recognizing, and also just I was lucky in my early education to be introduced to the works of Kimberly Crenshaw, recognizing how these worked in systems. But I think also I was very lucky in my upbringing in that I grew up in a house that was virulently anti-oppression in every form, right? And it doesn't mean, of course, that my mom was perfect or recognized, but anytime it popped up, our house, like the worst thing you could do in our house was like make a gay joke or make a joke about poor people or make a joke about people of color. These were a betrayal of our family and our values. And there was pride in helping instead of hurting and recognizing. And I think that oftentimes active intersectionality is not taught in households. What's taught instead is this kind of benign quality, that if you go around not saying a racist thing, not saying a bigoted thing, then you're doing good. But rarely are families practicing finding where you can do active good, recognizing and sitting in privilege. And when I started to see my privilege as an opportunity to do better, and started realizing that every time I was confronted with my privilege, that I had a place of power that other people didn't have, which meant I could deconstruct something other people couldn't deconstruct. It meant I was a room that other people weren't allowed in. Then it became really empowering and wonderful. And we have to be able to hold both of those things. We have to be able to recognize the brutality of which our privilege is often procured and obtained and maintained. But also we have to recognize the exclusive opportunity that privilege provides now that the system exists. And every time I look at things that I'm trying to tackle a problem, I think, am I holding space for what I don't know? Right? Am I holding space for a perspective that I may not have even considered exists? Am I seeking them out? And am I ready to be confronted with the harm I've done so that I can learn what I can do better? And holding those all together and recognizing that in that painful search, you're going to find great opportunity, and knowing that it's never done, recognizing that identity shifts. So part of intersectionality that's interesting is people will come to me and say, well, in the 70s, I knew a lot of Black people, so I know enough and I don't need to know more about intersectionality, as if the needs and desires and goals of the Black community didn't change since the 70s. So know that identity shifts, right? Know that, even as a queer woman, right, queer identity shifts. and our goals and what we need and how we're impacted by systems that are also shifting changes. And so being open to the fact that you're always missing pieces of the puzzle and that you're going to need contributions of other people, whether that's the work they've already done or hearing the feedback that they're giving you in order to continuously stay relevant and stay effective is really important.
Hi, thanks for being here today. It's a real gift to have you with us. I was wondering, do you have thoughts on power dynamics and what students can do when they're predominantly white faculty are trying to do anti-racist work, but us students don't always agree with what they're doing?
Yeah, definitely. So I would say, first of all, anti-racism lies in the expressed needs of people of color. And it doesn't lie anywhere else. And so you have the right to demand that anti-racism efforts lie in your expressed needs. And if it doesn't, you also have the right to not participate. That you are not serving anti-racism to participate in systems that don't meet your expressed needs or the expressed needs of other populations of color. And it's important for white professors and faculty members to recognize that they are not, no matter what degrees they have, ever going to be the experts on anti-racism. And they will always need to take a cue from their faculty of color and their students of color. And both, because generationally our needs differ. And so I would say be vocal about that, but also find who your allies are, who say they're supposed to listen, your academic, your faculty allies who say that they care, who are saying the right things. And that's where you hold them to account to really advocate for you. So often I meet like the cool professors who are like saying all the right things, but then when someone's really messing up, they'll try to whisper and be like, it's all right, we'll talk about it later, I got you. No, that's not helpful. What's helpful is if you put a little of your privilege on the line and advocate for it. And so it's really important to recognize that especially white faculty that say that they care, that say that this matters to them, that their actions are showing in the respect and honestly deference that they're giving to the lived experiences of students of color.
I'm from the School of Social Work, and today in class we were talking about historic trauma. And some people brought up that they don't like the word resilience, which is really used a lot in kind of talking about trauma-informed care. And they said it's because resilience has to do with does that mean some people in my community are less resilient than me? And also is resilience assimilating the white systems of oppression and just not liking that word. And I was just curious what you thought about.
Yeah, no, the resilience culture that is around discussions on race and discussions on poverty are incredibly harmful. It's important to recognize that our survival, what we survive, and our resilience is not a character trait. And oftentimes what happens when we praise resilience, what we're doing is we're trying to normalize that burden. And we should not. Anytime I see someone who has survived immense amounts of racial trauma and hardship, I am sad at what they've had to go through. And I am sad at the loss of what they could have done if they didn't have to. There's a myth that this makes us stronger. And every study shows it doesn't. Everyday stress from racism, worrying about your housing, worrying about violence, being erased from culture, that doesn't make you stronger. You're immensely strong to get through it, but you're robbed of half of your energy and your time. And the thought that it is really dehumanizing to have people think that the best thing you can do with all of your talents and energy is survive a racist system. We can do so much more. And we need to start challenging that notion. This is a notion that oftentimes it's very similar to what they say to artists, right? You know, like, oh, trauma, your best art's gonna come out of it. You know what? I know so many artists who would really love to sleep at night and would do a lot more work if they weren't crying every day. It's really hard to do that work from that space. And what you have then is an extraordinary amount of luck and inherent ability that creates an exception. But what we need to be striving for is for everyone, regardless of ability, regardless of particular skills or talent, to be able to thrive. And resilience culture starts from the standpoint that the only exceptions will. And that we have to somehow strive to be people with different skill sets. And that we are meant to carry this burden. All I see when I hear these stories of resilience is immense amount of lost opportunity. And when we look at how easy it is often to be mediocre and white in this society, and how often that's a death sentence for people of color, that's where we see the real harm of resilience culture. And we have to start recognizing the inherent value of everyone. And recognizing how white supremacist it is to only see certain things as success and not see many other things as success. And we start doing that by really looking at the total cost of white supremacy and recognizing that none of it is okay, that all of it is extreme injustice, and that we should support people in the ways that they strive, but that we should make it so that everyone has to strive less, and so they can focus on things that are far more personally rewarding to them than just getting by.
Thank you so much. I wanted to show my appreciation for what you do and also acknowledge the emotional labor that you put towards the work that you do. And so my question is related to that because I'm a professor here on campus whose research and teaching deals with race and other systemic issues. And it's hard to constantly be doing this with your life, right? And I also follow you on social media and know some of the major issues you've had to deal with, just even in the past month with swatting and other sorts of things. So what do you do to protect yourself, to make sure that you can keep doing the work that you do? And I know a lot of my colleagues here would like to know this as well. So.
You know, there's a couple of, you know what, I think I kicked this and now it's not. Hello, oh, now it's working, all right. There's a couple of things I keep in mind. One, if I wasn't doing this work, I would still be a Black woman in America, right? And I think that perspective is really important. I don't know what a break really looks like in that sense. You know, people were like, take a rest, take a break from what? Or really go to Wakanda for a while? Like, I don't, you know, where are you gonna go? Where's that spot? I wanna know. And part of why I always remember that too is that because I know I have to pace myself. A lot of the problems I'm facing now are gonna be problems I'm gonna face tomorrow, the day after, and I can't fight every single battle. But also, what I've started telling other people is, in particular Black women, because it's often Black women who are carrying a huge amount of burden in these discussions and in this work, is you are more important than white supremacy. Like you alone, more important than the entire system of white supremacy. And so if you're lost in this battle, we've lost. And it's important to remember that because we're so often expected to sacrifice ourselves. But we are who we're fighting for. And if we lose ourselves, then what do we have? And so I always try to tell people that, and now my partner in turn has started using that against me because I forget, and he'll pause when I'm like, no, I can do this other event too, and he's, You are more important than white supremacy. And I'm like, oh, I hate you. But it's important to remember that, and that means like I have to nurture myself. And I was saying to the student group I met with earlier, it's important for me to remember what I'm fighting for before I focus on what I'm fighting against, and to consistently go back to what I'm fighting for, because what I'm fighting for is not just survival. I am worth more than that. I am fighting for joy, for liberation. And that means that I have to go back to it and nurture it. And if I'm neglecting my joy and liberation, then the joy and liberation of my community, in order to fight white supremacy is getting all of my time and my effort. And I'm setting a really harmful message as to what I value. And that means sometimes I have to go back and remind myself and watch Black kids dancing and things like this, or go and spend time in community. And I have to actively say, I need community right now. I need space right now. I need a space free from this right now. And prioritize and structure my day so that I know that at least every day, part of my day is dedicated to maintaining what I'm trying to protect. And that kind of helps keep me going. And finding all those little victories in those spaces helps me remember that every life is worth saving. Every life of color is worth saving. And you get less lost and devastated every time something goes wrong, because it is a devastating loss every time something goes wrong. But it is also an amazing victory for every single way in which it can go right. And we have to respect both. Hope that helps.
I'll echo what others have said, but I'll keep my question short. What would success look like, and what does it look like day to day for you? Maybe in the last couple of examples you've had of a white person, maybe a white guy like me, who lives in white supremacy and has basked in it and is being challenged from lots of circles now, and I'm glad for that. Yeah. What does success look like? Who are some of the fellow warriors out there in this battle against racism that have warmed your heart and keep you doing your work?
Yeah, that's a good question. I'm going to use an example of my mom, honestly, because my mom's a white woman. And I think she's a good example because A, she was not young when she started coming to this. And I write about in the book how we really didn't start having substantive conversations on race. My mom was very pro-Black my whole life. I'm very lucky for that. Not many mixed-race Black kids are raised in pro-Black households. My mom was, but she was still very white and didn't think she needed to investigate her relationship to people of color. And she never really thought systemically about racism. Her fear was a cop, something like that, someone saying a word to me, saying a slur to me, but she didn't think that there was more to know because whiteness let her think that there wasn't more to know. She also thought that love could really cure a lot of racism, and she thought that because she loved me and my brother and my sister with everything she had, that not only had she transcended racism, she had transcended whiteness. And what she did in that was she abdicated all personal white power she had to make a difference. And so when my mom and I started talking honestly about this, what we started talking about was, A, I had to get her to accept her whiteness. And accept that that meant that she had a vastly different lived experience from her children that she loves so dearly. And I will say that this is something too, if you have kids who are queer, disabled, transgender, it is likely that you're doing the same harmful things to your children. In being threatened by the difference in lived experience and silencing it and saying, no, I love you. It's like I feel you. You hurt, I hurt. It's not how that works. But in working with my mom and talking about whiteness and talking about opportunity, what it did was it brought us closer together in a couple of ways. One, she knew where she fit in my racial experience. Right? She understood now it wasn't a threat for me to talk about issues as a Black person, because she understood as a white person she could listen for what difference she could make. She was able to see her place in the system. Instead of just saying, I'm going to share enough Facebook statuses to cure racism, I'm going to look at myself as an active white person and see what I can do. I'm going to start looking at the access I have. I'm going to look at my peer group, look what's being said. So where my mom decided to focus was in her union. She's a how old is my mom? 60-something, white lady, in her union. And every union meeting, she brings up racial equity. Every single meeting. Not a meeting can go by without it being talked about. She's constantly reaching out. She's constantly asking what's missing. She's asking her customers, and she works for a state agency that serves large majority populations of color. Constantly asking what services, how can we improve our services? How can we look at this from a racial justice lens? She knows she can be that person that's always, always bringing it up, and they're gonna humor her because she's an old white lady. And she knows she can do that without risking her career the way in which the few people of color can. And she's so cognizant of it that she called me, and she was at a national union meeting in Boston. And it was like the anniversary of some big union thing. So they all met there, and she was in this bar, and my mom's a notorious lightweight. One drink and she's mortifying. And she was there, and she said she was like, Ijeoma, there was this smug white guy talking about what he was doing in communities of color and how he was lifting them up, and he was getting them the training, and he was telling them how to dress and what haircuts to get and how to be successful. And she was like, he just sounded so sure of himself. And she was like, and he was talking and talking, and no one that was sitting at the table could get it word in edgewise. And she was like, and I thought, you know what? He's not going to tell an old white lady to shut up. So I got a whole drink. She's like, and I sat with him, and I told him that he needed to start listening to the people of color he thinks he's serving. He needed to read better books. She's like, and I gave him your book, and I need another one, by the way, because I'm out. But she knew she was fully sitting in her power and privilege and using it, leveraging it. And it doesn't mean that she's perfect. There's so many times where she's just, I'm like, oh my God, why are we going over this again? Oh my God. But she's open to it. And the fact that she knows that she's not going to always get it right. And that I can come back and be like, Mom, remember, we talked about this. She's like, oh no, again. She's made peace with her humanness, her fallibility. She's recognized that there's white supremacy in her that will probably never be fully rooted out. But she's dedicated herself to fighting it wherever she sees it. And she's tried to find her spaces where she has unique privilege, and she uses it every day. And I'm so proud of her, you know, and it's been wonderful. And we can talk about these things in a way we never could before. And she's a better friend to her coworkers of color in a way that she never was before. And she looks in the mirror and feels like the person she always said she wanted to be. And it's just beautiful. And I think there's no age limit to that. Your own little corner, you can make that meaningful difference. And I hope that everyone takes that opportunity.
Thank you so much.